Okay, welcome everyone to Convergence 2013. This is being sponsored by the Down East Research and Education Network. You might recall that we've had Convergence conferences in 2011 and 2012. Convergence is defined by Webster as the act of coming together from different directions towards a common goal. More specifically, in the business community, it is considered a network of complementary activities drawn to a region by its primary assets. And I think that most of us in this room know what our primary assets are. It's this very unique and charismatic landscape and its natural resources. So today, we are coming from many different directions, many different places, with a common goal or a shared interest and a shared theme, and that is our landscape and its natural resources. We began Convergence in 2011 with an introduction to networking, and from that conference we actually formed the Down East Research and Education Network. So this is the third year for the network, and as a result of forming this network, we have formed a clearinghouse website, which I hope most of you have seen and used. We have decided that the goal of the network is to provide research collaboration and communication opportunities among researchers, educators, landowners, land trusts, conservation organizations, managers, and academic institutions in both Hancock and Washington County, Maine. We do this by maintaining the website, providing newsletters, this annual conference, and by spearheading specific projects. Convergence 2012 focused on the economic impacts of conservation. And from that discussion, the network has raised funds and is initiating a study which will look into the economic benefits of conservation in our region. And we hope to have some work on that by late 2014. Today's Convergence is focused on landscape level conservation. So we are all here today to talk about a type of conservation that is also called large landscape conservation and is generally defined or characterized as conservation which crosses either multi-jurisdictional or multi-purpose or multi-stakeholder boundaries. And we're going to hear several talks about this in more detail, so I won't spend any time on that. But our goal is to discuss how we as Durham members, part of this network, conservation organizations in general and agencies, conservation professionals, how we can work together more creatively, strategically, effectively, to conserve and support the Down East landscape. So we have 5 speakers today. We'll have a panel discussion, we'll have a group discussion, and there's also a poster session. The poster session is across the hall. We are generously sponsored by Frenchman Bay Conservancy, the Maine Community Foundation, Almina B. Sewell Foundation, and Davis Conservation Foundation. And we want to thank all of those members. A little bit of housekeeping. The restrooms are out in the hall and down the hall to the right at the end of that hall. Lunch is at Schooner Commons, and it's a little bit of a walk, so we're allowing an hour and 15 minutes. So at about 1 o'clock, please make sure that you're heading back because we will be starting promptly at 1:15. And there are maps out on the table. I think that's about it. What I'd like to do is turn this over to Mike Suka, who is the director of SERC, and he will welcome you.
Good morning. It's a beautiful day out. I'm Mike Sukup, and I want to welcome you to the Schoodic Education and Research Center. I am the president and CEO of the Schoodic Institute. The Schoodic Institute was created by Acadia National Park to help develop this site and to operate it. This site is now one of 19 research learning centers across the national park system. A research learning center is a site that adaptively reuses existing structures in a national park. And its purpose in adaptively reusing structures is to enhance, support, and initiate research that can be used by park management, but also can be directly connected to experiences, to educational experiences of all kinds, and to really drive the education and outreach programs. Think of the national parks as ultimate laboratories and inspirational classrooms. A research learning center is designed to make that happen. You're in a site that has an interesting history. From 1935 to 2002, the U.S. Navy developed an extensive base here. It was very important as a listening post. It had a big role in the Bay of Pigs, which didn't turn out so well, but the Cuban Missile Crisis was a little bit better. It was a very top secret place that didn't really welcome people. Now the gates are down and the guards are gone, and this is a community resource within a national park. The Schoodic Institute is a nonprofit 501c3, and we work really closely with the Acadia National Park staff. So it really works very well, except perhaps when the government shuts down and the pieces come tumbling down. We hope to have a really big, exciting program of crossover and overlap this week for you. We had the Acadia Science Conference planned for this week because that's so dependent on park people, we had to cancel that. We also had the first pilot attempt to do an international short course for people who care about national parks all over the world to come here and see how well protected area development works. It doesn't work quite so well when the federal government shuts down. So we had to tell the Colombians and the Argentinians and the Chileans not to come because things aren't working so well. What that means is this week is a little bit less of an opportunity for crossover in interdisciplinary and interesting connections that we might have made today. So we're so happy that we didn't have to cancel this. We got pretty lonely, so we're really happy that you're here. So now that the fences are down and we're open for business, we cut our last ribbon on July 3rd with the dedication of Rockefeller Hall. If you haven't seen that building, go and see it today. The fences are down, the guards are gone. This is a real regional community resource, and we'd love to see everyone use it. We're doing strategic planning right now. We're going to do a whole range of things from conferences. We hope to teach courses here. We hope to house a lot of sabbaticals and a lot of partner institutions. We may even do a few weddings here. If you've got a wedding that you want to be a part of in the next couple of years, come and talk to us. We'd love to use you as a guinea pig. So we're building the programs here. We're facility rich. I hope you see a lot of the buildings, and now we have to become program rich. We already have some successful programs. I'd love to tell you about them, but I don't have time this morning. I'll be here all day, and if you want to talk about any aspect of this place, I'd be happy to do it. We are very well along the pathway of doing really interesting research on how to teach science better in Maine secondary schools. We have a strong program. Bill Zellick, I don't see him here, but we have a strong program and a good start on that. We also have a good start on bird migration studies. This is a great place to study migratory behavior of birds, maybe even bats and butterflies, and certainly dragonflies. So we want to develop that program. We think coastal forest health is something that we can really contribute in, and we're trying to build a very strong program in that, as well as we'd like to do something to help many of you in the ocean health arena. That's something that we've scoped out as something we'd like to do. We're not so sure what that looks like, but we'd love to be a regional asset to help with that. That issue, I think, is so enormous that the solutions have to be at the same scale as the rate of development of the issue. We are interested in environmental history. Acadia National Park has a long record of people collecting data. We're trying to make those data available. So if you're going to do research in this area, you can come here and be in an information-rich context, so you don't have to do a lot of the background stuff. There's been a lot of monitoring and a lot of natural history done here, and we want to develop that as a key program. Everything we do here will be built on a very strong, rigorous citizen science platform. We want to make that part of our learning opportunities, but also part of our science contribution. I hope you'll think of this place as a regional asset, as a convener. This kind of conference and what you're trying to do here is exactly what we'd love to support in any way that we can. Think of it as a sort of an experiment. I think of it as an experiment. My wife says, don't tell everybody you don't know what you're doing. But it's an experiment in really making national parks much more than a vacation destination, but much more of a player and a strong positive force for conservation at the regional scale. So thanks again for coming today. I'm so glad we didn't have to postpone or cancel. It's great to have you here talking about the things that you do. Thank you.
Hello. Closer far to be. My name is Lisa Heyward, and I am the chair of the steering committee for Down East Research Education Network. It's a network. We don't have a structure. We just have a steering committee, and trying to keep it loose and open and attuned to each other. I wanted to make that minor clarification. My role here today is, again, welcome you and to introduce our speaker, our keynote speaker, who is Jim Levitt. He's the director of the program on conservation innovation at the Harvard Forest for Harvard University, and is a fellow in the Department of Planning and Urban Form at the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy. He also serves as a fellow at the Ash Center for Democratic Governance and Innovation at the Harvard Kennedy School. Jim is a student of the history and evolution of the conservation movement in North America and the world, focusing on landmark conservation innovations that are marked by novelty, strategic significance, measurable effectiveness, transferability, and the ability to endure. And he has the added benefit and joy of having a summer place here in this vicinity on both Tunk Lakes, actually. Welcome, Jim Levitt.
So today is a very exciting day for two reasons. The first one has to do with my baseball team, okay? We're in the World Series, all right. I couldn't resist that. The second, of course, is to be here with all of you. And I actually know more than half the people in this room, so some of you have heard me talk about some of this. I'll try to give it a new twist today, but the most important thing I want to say is how convinced I am that the paradigm of large landscape conservation applies to Down East Maine and to southwestern New Brunswick. We have here, as you know, one of the places on the continent that is most ripe for conservation right now. And we have some people in the audience who have done amazing things. I'm looking at Mark Berry right now and all that he's done with a tiny little staff up in the corner of Washington County. So I get to talk about this subject in different places around the world, in China, in Chile, but I love coming to Down East Maine to be able to share this with you. All right. So I want to talk about, first, landmark conservation innovations. And by that, I want to be fairly literal. By landmark, I mean innovations that leave a mark on the land or on the map. The national parks, the state parks, the easements, the trails that go from Bangor to the Canadian border, these are all innovative projects, particularly innovative in this part of the world because they've been replicated many other places, and they have certainly left a mark on the map. They are characterized by 5 attributes: novelty or creativity in conception, strategic significance, that is, changing the way that people practice conservation, measurable effectiveness with a yardstick that is not simply, gee, this is fun, I love this project, but having a significant difference in terms of landscape connectivity, in terms of wildlife viability, in terms of water quality and water quantity, in terms of amenities provided to vacationers and people who live here year-round. Transferability to other jurisdictions, I will talk about that a little bit more later, but there have been innovations that are adjacent to this national park that have changed the conservation history of the world. So this is a place where transferability is really an important topic. And an ability to endure. If you were to innovate in the semiconductor industry or the breakfast cereal industry, an innovation that had an impact for 5 or 10 years would just be great. You would have a big return on investment, you would have lots of customers, you would make a profit, and then 5 or 10 years later, you'd go on to the next innovation. In the field of conservation, particularly when we're aiming at perpetuity, we have to be able to see what we do endure for a very long time, like a decade or a century or 400 years in North America. Those are the kind of innovations that I want to talk to you about today. And really all we need to get those done are 3 essential elements. Some of the most advanced IT technology in particular available on the market today, inventive organizational and financial tools that give us the wherewithal to get these projects done, and truly exceptional talent. Talent that can change a community of practice that's active across the Western Hemisphere, across the Atlantic, across the Pacific. Okay, the first innovation that I want to talk about quickly is one that several people here have heard me talk about before. It's the invention in a democratic context of the first open space in North America. That would be the Boston Common. In 1630, John Winthrop settled in Boston at the invitation of another Englishman named Blackstone. And before he even left England to come to the New World, Winthrop said, "For we shall be as a city upon a hill. The eyes of all people are upon us." I'm going to put my coat on because I'm standing right under an air conditioner, and it's cold up here. So Winthrop was not aiming to have an impact on his family or his neighbors or even his town. He aimed to reform the Church of England, which was the most important religious institution in his world. And in fact, he succeeded. In 1634, having given his fellows the right to vote for magistrates in a town election, Winthrop and the townspeople who lived in Boston with him got an offer from a guy named John Blackstone, who lived in Boston even before the pilgrims came. He decided he'd had enough of their rules and that he wanted to move to what became Rhode Island. So he offered the town 50 acres of land, and the magistrates elected by the people decided to tax each household 6 shillings to get the money to make this deal happen. This is the first time that we know of where there was taxation, self-taxation, for conservation. There had been parks in North America before that. There was one created by the King of Spain in St. Augustine in 1573, but that was a feudal or royally created open space. The Boston Common is the first time we know of in the English-speaking world where self-governing people taxed themselves to buy open space for themselves. And in fact, this innovation has had tremendous implications across the United States and across the world. Let me ask this audience, as I've asked many other audiences, does anyone here know of a town or a city or a county in this country or anywhere, I guess, in North America that does not have a park? I've never had anybody raise their hand and tell me one. Somebody thinks maybe there's a county in Indiana that doesn't have a park, but they couldn't name the county. Okay, so this little idea that started in Boston was first created for cows and for training military bands, but within 30 years became a recreational resource. That is, by 1660, young gallants and their marmalette madams, their sweethearts, were parading across the common. Has spread to every jurisdiction in the United States. By 2011, only in the 100 largest cities in this country, there were 22,493 parks. This is a powerful, powerful innovation. Creative in conception, strategically significant in the way we do conservation, measurably effective. For example, the most valuable real estate in New England is adjacent to the Boston Common because people like to be next to this open space. Transferable, it's ubiquitous, and has endured for nearly 400 years. A model innovation. The second innovation that I want to quickly talk to you about on my way to talking about large landscape conservation is not simply a spot on the map. You saw a little spot on the top of that slide. It really has to do with a line. It was a destination, as Mike Sukup said, where people from the East Coast took the Transcontinental Railroad to California to visit this incredible spot that Abraham Lincoln set aside in 1864 to be inalienable to the people of California. It was actually created as a state park and became a national park later on. Yellowstone was the world's first national park created by Ulysses S. Grant in 1872. The measurable effectiveness of this park, just in terms of amenities, is astounding. Even by the early 1900s, the visitation at Yosemite was down in the probably 5,000 to 10,000 range. Today, there are 4 million visitors a year at Yosemite, and there would be much more if we didn't limit the visitation because we're really very close to carrying capacity. So this is beyond Leland Stanford's imagination when he built the first hotel to house railroad visitors from the East who wanted to go visit this natural wonder. And there are national parks in something like 120 countries around the world, more than 1 billion acres of national park today, 1,000 times more than when Yosemite was created. Again, an outstanding, almost astounding innovation that's endured for 150 years and continues to grow. So we come to a topic that really has to do with this very locality in which we're sitting. The land trust movement was actually founded in Massachusetts in 1891 by Charles Eliot, who was the son of the president of Harvard University. he proposed there that the citizens of the towns of Boston should create a private association which would hold beautiful pieces of land for the benefit of the public, the way that the library holds books and the art museum holds pictures and sculptures. His innovation was chartered by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. It became what is today known as the Trustees of Reservations in Massachusetts. And after he came up here and with his father founded something called the Trustees of Hancock County Reservations, he died at a very young age of meningitis. And his father and George Dorr and the Rockefellers and a number of other people that you all know better than I decided that they would take this land trust land, what was essentially land trust land in the early 1900s, which was being threatened by the legislature of the state of Maine, to, I believe it was President Wilson, and make it into a national park. It was either Taft or Wilson. And the president accepted that gift, and Acadia became the first national park east of the Mississippi, and the first national park that had been created from what had entirely been private land. So again, remarkable innovation. Mostly wealthy philanthropists went out, purchased land, donated it to a land trust, and then to the national government to protect it, and it's one of the most heavily visited national parks in the whole system. Now, the story doesn't stop there. In the 1970s, Mrs. David Rockefeller, Peggy Rockefeller, and a guy named Tom Cabot wanted to protect an island next to Mount Desert Island called Bartlett Island, and they wanted to give it to a land trust, which they went on to create, called the Maine Coast Heritage Trust. And Jay, please correct me if I've got my history messed up. And they went to some lawyers in New York and said, we're going to donate. They bought the island for themselves, and they decided to donate the development rights on that island to Maine Coast Heritage Trust and ask for a tax deduction in exchange for that donation. And they got some very expensive New York lawyers to work on this for a number of years so that the IRS would approve that deduction. Her motivation was not to get a little tax deduction for the Rockefeller family. That wasn't their primary concern. They thought that if they came up with this little innovation, it might spark the growth of the land trust movement across the United States. By 1979, it had become part of IRS regulations, and the land trust movement took off. You can see the inflection point in around let's see on this chart, it actually happened around 1985, where we went from 300 or 400 land trusts in the United States to 1,700. And if you include the land protected by the Nature Conservancy, I believe that the land in fee and the easement land that is protected by land trusts in the United States, just like the Frenchman Bay Conservancy and MCHT and all the other Down East Lakes Land Trust, exceeds Neff, Whitbeals, Neff is here, that's also a land trust of sorts, exceeds 50 million acres. Again, a remarkable innovation. I'm involved right now in helping to take that innovation and translate it into a context where it will be useful in Chile. The president of Chile is actually personally interested in seeing that this kind of financial innovation be made available to people who want to donate easements or servidumbre in Chile. Okay, so we created these networks across the United States, these interconnection of lines that hold all kinds of different protected lands. The National Park System is a network. The National Forest System is a network. The Land Trust Alliance membership that holds all this land, private land and NGO land, form a network of sorts. Very important in the history of conservation. And you can see on this map of New England that was published by the USGS, is available online, that we have an incredible amount of protected land across Massachusetts, Connecticut, southern New England, northern New England. Not all of Maine is on this map, but I'll show some maps of Maine in a second. We've really done a tremendous job over the last 400 years, if you can count the Boston Common, or over the last 100 years, if you just start with Teddy Roosevelt, of protecting land in New York State, New England, and indeed across the United States. We have incredible technology that allows us to take a little box out of our briefcase, turn it on, connect it to a wireless network, whatever the heck that is, and get this information instantaneously. We have the power to analyze this stuff in ways that, when I was in graduate school in the late 1970s, would have been unimaginable. We can pinpoint with incredible precision what we're doing to our planet. The brown pixels that you see on this map of the United States are the places where vegetation was below normal in 2012. This is the place, if you live in New England, you can talk freely about this. If you live in Kansas, which is where my wife grew up, not so much. We have something called global warming. We can tell exactly where it's happening. And we get Landsat satellites telling us this every 6 weeks with incredible precision. We can also see the little green dots in Canada, and I think there's some in the Southwest, where vegetation is a little bit above normal. But you can tell that the change in the climate is having a tremendous impact on a continental scale. We can see that too with these little boxes that we carry around in our briefcases. What we're only learning to do today, what we're just getting good at, is to figure out how we tie all these beautiful systems that we've built together into a whole that is greater than the sum of the parts. So on the far left, you see the National Forest System. In the middle, you see the National Park System. On the right, you see the National Wildlife Refuge System. I don't have a map of all the land trusts in the United States, but the dots would go all the way across the country. What we're just beginning to figure out is how do we weave these things all together so that we have contiguous corridors that give us wildlife, that give us sustainable production of wood, that give us clean and abundant water, that give us recreation, that give us ecosystem services. That is, I believe, the challenge of the 21st century. We need to create from a network here and a network here and a network here something that should be familiar to all of you, a network of networks. Something like an internet of protected spaces, where for water and wildlife and sustainable production and amenities, these different places are to some extent interoperable. That is, I can send an email from this computer to Australia to a bank instantaneously, and it probably crosses so many networks I couldn't count them before it gets to the recipient. But the recipient doesn't know or care, and he can send the response right back to me. That's an interoperable system. We're just getting to a conception of that with regard to open spaces. At the Lincoln Institute, which is one of the places I work, we're beginning to catalog all of the large landscape conservation initiatives that are trying to weave together public land and private land and nonprofit land and land controlled by institutions like universities and colleges and churches together into a whole that is greater than the sum. This is not only happening in the United States. This is another example that I had the opportunity to see in August of this year in Chile, where they're saving alerce trees, which are these huge trees like our sequoias or redwoods that were endangered by actually timber companies who were turning these beautiful trees into dimensional lumber that was coming up to Home Depot in Ellsworth. There was a threatened boycott of Home Depot by some environmental activists. Home Depot told its Chilean timber suppliers, you have to stop cutting these native forests right now. There are other ways for you to send us timber from Chile than that. The law of Chile changed several years ago, and there's now a prohibition on cutting down these native forests with these magnificent trees. And so now the challenge comes to the conservation community. How do we protect these ecosystems for decades and centuries to come? And the Nature Conservancy, working with its affiliate down there, in connection with the regional government and the national government of Chile, has just created this incredible complex of protected areas that has, among other things, along the red line that's on the left side of the map, a 9-kilometer beach on the Pacific Ocean with beautiful kind of beige sand and dolphins swimming in the waves right outside of it. It is just breathtaking. 10 years ago, the property was not protected at all. So we're coming up with ideas here in Down East Maine, in places like Montana, where we have the Crown of the Continent initiative. That's a 19 million acre initiative that spans the borders of Montana, Alberta, and British Columbia, where the managers of different parcels of land are working with one another on conservation corridors for grizzly bears, on invasive species, on water quality and water quantity, and they're making very dramatic, measurable progress. So these innovations that we're just seeing emerge today are right now spreading to places like Chile and Kenya and Australia and New Zealand and you name it. It's really a very exciting time because we're in at the ground floor of another stage of innovation in the field of conservation. Now this is I pulled this off of this GIS system that the USGS sponsors online. I know that it is not a complete map of the area that we're in now with regard to protected lands, but you can see even in the close-in area that we are in right now, there are several really exciting opportunities for large landscape scale conservation. That is, as Barbara said, conservation across jurisdictional boundaries, across sectoral boundaries, using a multidisciplinary approach with layered financing tools. So we are, of course, right down here, and that should be green now. Peter Stein and these people who have worked on the Modena property have protected that. There is some interest in going all the way from here and seeing if we can create a protected lands corridor up to the Donnell Pond unit, which is the yellow and purple up above. And I know that Tom Sadar at Frenchman Bay Conservancy is also working on another link from Long Pond, which is up there. I won't use the pointer, but connects on another vector to the Donnell Pond unit. So right here where we're sitting, we have this incredibly exciting opportunity to create a connection between the ocean and the inland that's just right in front of us. And we wouldn't have that opportunity if Charles Eliot hadn't have had some foresight more than 100 years ago, if Peggy Rockefeller hadn't worked to protect Bartlett Island, if the Frenchman Bay Conservancy and Bayard Ewing hadn't protected a little beach on Little Tunk Pond in the 1980s, and so on and so on and so on. We're building on the shoulders of giants, and it's happening right here where we're sitting. Okay, now if you go from the close in where I was just now, which is this area in red right here, you can see the possibility for connections of some kind or another. And I know that getting from here to there is a very complicated task, and I don't have a cookbook to tell you how to do it. But from this red square rectangle in the bottom, you can see the opportunity to have some kind of connections to this incredible complex of protected land that, again, Mark Berry had a lot to do with, and Neff had a lot to do with, in working forests up in this corner of Washington County. And in fact, if I had a map that was binational, I could show you protected lands on the New Brunswick side of the border. And for the black bears that are wandering around up there, they don't really care if they're in the United States or Canada. Neither do the Canadians. Okay, fair enough. And then we've got this other thing that's popping up now, where this river that's coming here through Bangor has suddenly opened up for the first time in 150 years for anadromous fish, all the way up, way inland in the vicinity of Millinocket, where you have this other tremendous complex of protected lands. And the colors, of course, show the different kinds of ownership. So right here in Down East Maine and in Penobscot County and so on, we have historic opportunities. I had a group here at Schoodic last summer that included students from Belize, from Guatemala, from Chile, from El Salvador, from Pennsylvania, from Massachusetts, and from Maine. And we took them for 2 days to show them where the VZ Dam was coming down. And we had them talk with John Banks, who's this native leader who says his people have been waiting for this for longer than you can imagine. And we said to these young people, okay, imagine you are the board of directors of this imaginary organization called the Penobscot River Institute, and you need to give us a strategic plan for how we have a vision, how we protect riparian resources, how we protect land resources, and I know from a conversation this morning I should have said how we protect marine resources, because this is just unprecedented. For more than 1,000 miles of river, just to open up like that in front of your eyes. And they came up with some great ideas. So I know that progress is more than just imaginable. I think that it's entirely possible. It's going to take the public sector at the federal, the state, the local level. It's going to take the NGO sector or the nonprofit sector, including MCHT, Frenchman Bay, TNC, NEF. I'm not going to try to name everyone that's in this room, but there are many, many creative, inventive players that are here today. It's going to take private sector actors, from the Pingree family to the members of SWOM. It's going to take academic and research sector people like me, like people at the University of Maine, in Orono, in Machias, at the College of the Atlantic, at Colby College, at Unity College, and so on and so on and so on, to imagine and then get this stuff done. But it is doable. I will close by saying that at the Harvard Forest and at the Lincoln Institute, we're working on several different loose affiliated networks to bring together people who are getting this stuff invented in very disparate places. The Conservation Catalyst Network is bringing together academics who are helping to catalyze these kind of projects. This is the Acadian Program in Landscape Conservation and Stewardship that I was just talking about, that actually meets in a building that's a 2-minute walk from here. Young people from all over the world. We had 2 years ago some people from Palestine and South Africa who were looking at this place and just had their breath taken away. And we're inviting students here in Down East Maine and across the world to submit essays that would qualify them to go to the International Union for the Conservation of Nature's World Parks Congress in Sydney, Australia, next November, a year from now, who are themselves participating in large landscape conservation initiatives. We're looking for submissions in the natural sciences, the social sciences, policy and professional studies, humanities and creative arts. The call for papers is going to come out in a couple of weeks, but if anybody has any ideas, feel free to send me an email. My email is very simple, James_Levitt. There is no A in my last name. Many Levitts in Maine have an A, but I don't. At harvard.edu. It's a small college in Massachusetts. It's amazing what the young people that we've already given such opportunities to are coming up with. Ideas for easement systems in Trinidad and Tobago. New ways to use the humanities to inspire people to conserve land in Montana and in Iowa, and it's just very inspiring to see what the generation coming up is inventing. I want to close and open this up for questions for a couple of minutes, but given the fact that I actually, for a month and a half, 2 months a year, am a local resident, I very much look forward to working with many of you as we go forward. Thank you very much. In the back, there's one right back there. Yes, sir.
Thank you. One of the, we're talking about networks here, and one of the things that I think is very important, but perhaps in the land conservation community we don't talk about enough, is networking with the local economies. There are people living in these areas who are impacted by the conservation, and it's often land conservation is often perceived as having a negative impact on their lives. Sometimes it really does in terms of economics.
Right.
How do we address that?
Can you tell me who you are?
Oh, I'm Tom Hitchens. I'm with the Down East Salmon Federation.
Okay. I think you're exactly on point, particularly in Down East, well, everywhere, but it's very important in Down East Maine. There have been a number of studies that are very, very good that show actually that conservation enhances local economies. I know that Headwaters Economics from Montana, who's done some work out here, have done very good studies. I know that there are people at Bowdoin and different colleges and universities of Maine who have done that. I think that the narrative that is effective when you're trying to help people understand that conservation and economic development go together is one that is forward-looking. You've really got to get people to imagine their future. To go to Millinocket and say, you know, I can't do much for the pulp and paper industry here is a hard reality for some people to cope with. And, you know, there may be a bright future for that industry in some other configuration, or there may not. I'm not an expert in that. But I know that there is both the opportunity to do sustainable forestry in Down East Maine that has not yet been fully realized. My cabin on Tunk Pond is actually made with logs from the Pingree Forest, and I specified Forest Stewardship Council when I bought those logs so that I knew that I was getting that high quality. And I think that's something that people in the conservation community can use to reach out across the table and say, you know, we're here to give you a livelihood as well. And there are non-forest product industries that are very important. And I know that I'm telling you stuff that you already know, but the potential impact of tourism along the conservation corridors that I was mentioning is tremendous. Let me just say, up and down the Penobscot River. Someone this morning was telling me about, on the Kennebec River, the return of the alewives in incredible numbers. I think you told me that there were 5 or 6 acres of alewives 2 or 3 feet deep, just thick across Kennebec, the bay that the Kennebec spills into. So that's got to lead to anadromous fish and cold water fisheries and warm water fisheries and all kinds of stuff that brings economic value. But for people who live in the interior in Maine, you've got to help them think of the past and the present and the future, and what kind of jobs may come to a place that they hadn't really gotten their arms around before. And I know that there are people in this room who are working very hard on that, and I applaud you for your efforts on that. Other questions? Right here.
Michael Good from over in Bar Harbor, and I'm sorry I got here late, but one of the best examples of what he was speaking about, what just happened with the shutdown of the park. And what we saw in Bar Harbor was complete chaos at the local level. People who are dealing with running our economies. So thinking about the future happened with George Door and Acadia National Park. And if the people up in the county can think that way and think about securing the future of our watersheds, specifically the Penobscot, the headwaters to the Penobscot and Kennebec, some kind of a park system in northern Maine makes sense because we have an economy built around Acadia National Park. It hit me because my first day of the shutdown was supposed to be my company's biggest day, and that happened across America. So these connections are very real, and the people in our communities depend on them. So we have to make sure that they keep going. And so thank you for bringing up the economics and the connection to our communities.
I'm sure you're doing this, and I'm sure you're politically active. But I know that in Maine, when people go up and buttonhole their elected representatives listen. This is a small state in terms of population, and a lot of people know Mike Michaud, and a lot of people know the governor and everybody else. And it's important face to face to say to them, look, you know, you may side with these guys or with those guys, but what just happened, I had to lay 4 people off. You gotta fix this now. It's important to their families. I'm going to stop there, or I'm going to say something that my language will get too strong. But I was not a supporter of the shutdown or the threatened debt craziness.
Can I just take a poll? Just checking.
I didn't mean to bring it up, but it's
No, I know.
classic.
I will say, one of my friends told me, and I happen to agree, that it was one of the stupidest ideas since the invention of the Confederacy. I mean, just forget it. There was a question over here. Yeah.
I'm John Kelly. I'm a park planner here at Acadia. I had a question on your slide that showed the land ownership by land trusts. In early 90s, there was the lines crossed from fee lands and easement lands. I was wondering what was the impetus at that point that skyrocketed the easements?
It was Mrs. Rockefeller's invention. It was the fact that people suddenly understood that in a very responsible and legal way, they could hold on to their land, give away the development rights, and maybe not get as much as they would get if they sold the land, but get enough to make it something that would be protected in perpetuity that they could participate in. So remember at the beginning of the talk I said there are only 3 things that we need to make these things happen. We need advanced technology, we need inventive organizational and financial tools, and we need exceptional talent. That's a case in which a financial tool, something worked out by some lawyers in New York negotiating with the IRS, changed the landscape of the United States. Okay, I think I have
You do have time for one more question.
one more question.
Yes.
I noticed I'm Alan Kane, I'm on the Board of Directors down East Salmon Federation. I'm president of the Maine Council Atlantic Salmon Federation, so I'm more as concerned about the fisheries as preserving other things. I noticed most of your wildlife management zones, and one thing that's significantly absent from that big map that you have there
Right.
are fishery management zones offshore.
Okay.
We put wildlife management zones in many areas that protect all the wildlife. Well, we need places offshore where you don't fish.
Right.
They're off limits so that we can help restore what's going on offshore. There's a lot of problems, but that will give areas where Mother Nature can do amending, and they've done this in other countries. We're ahead as far as land conservation and those practices here in this country, but we're way behind with our marine
Protected areas.
ecological protection.
Right.
Because in other countries, New Zealand, Australia, they do these things, and that's something that we need to address yesterday.
I think there are two issues that you bring up. One is the ability of the USGS to keep up with the volume of protected areas that get added to the system every month. And they're working hard at that. There are marine protected areas in the United States. I don't know that how many of them are right here off of down East Maine. There should be more, I think. So problem one is just representing where those protected areas are and how they relate to the terrestrial protected areas. And two is getting the job done of actually protecting those resources. And I think, I'm not an expert in this, but I think that the opening of the Penobscot may offer interesting opportunities that have to be negotiated between people who know a lot more about protected areas in marine and brackish waters than I do, but I welcome your comment. I think it's a good comment. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. I do want to mention one thing in response to Alan's question. I'm presenting at a Water Commons conference seminar on Friday in Belfast, if anyone is interested. And the focus of that conference will be to look at this same level, this same type of planning that we do on land, okay? Can we start doing it in our bays, at least in the nearshore environment, if not farther out? So that will be a very interesting discussion. If anyone is interested in attending that, again, it's Belfast on this Friday. Okay, our next speaker is Bill Levitt from Hempstead, and Bill is a Regional Conservation Partnership Network Coordinator, and he's going to tell us about RCPs. And for some of you, this may be a new topic, but I just wanted to let you know that Darren is already a member of the New England RCP network, right? Okay.
Correct.
So, this is Bill.
Great, thank you. So first of all, I just want to say thank you to the organizers for inviting me here. This is the first time, not the first time in Down East Maine. I actually have an uncle who lives in Millbridge, and my first college sweetheart lives nearby. Yeah, I think you know her. But happy to be here, and also happy to be here at this meeting. I've heard about the Convergence. I've heard about Darren. I've looked at your organization on the website, so it's great to be here to meet your members. So the first thing I want to do is Barbara kind of stole my thunder a little bit, but it gives me an introduction. This is obviously your region, and you're seeing this as your region outline on what's an image from an online map of regional conservation partnerships. And you can also see the protected land in brown, and the green is the TNC resiliency information. I don't know if those of you who are aware of that, the climate resiliency data. And what I also wanted to say is that back in 2011, we had our annual event called the RCP Network Gathering. I sent around a map asking people for information on other partnerships that they knew of, and a couple of people identified a map. You should talk to Darren. They're a network. They're an RCP. So that's how you're identified. And as we move along in my talk, you'll see that you're very much an RCP, although I might say you're an emerging regional conservation partnership. And I hope through my talk, I give you some information about RCPs, what they do, why we care about them, and that the RCP network may provide you with opportunities both to contribute to the growing community of RCPs and the knowledge about how to do large landscape conservation in New England, but also there may be opportunities for you to gain resources from it. And in short, I'd hope my talk will help you in your thinking about what is your path. What is, in other words, what is the ultimate fruition of your network here in Hancock and Washington counties. So you can see that as a member of the RCP network, you're among friends. There are actually 38 regional conservation partnerships in New England, 39 if you count the 40 million acre plus Staying Connected initiative. And so we'll be able to at least highlight some of these RCPs for you. First of all, I thought I'd just give you a definition. A lot of this information about regional conservation partnerships that I'll be presenting is found in the current issue of the Journal of Forestry on a research paper called Regional Conservation Partnerships in New England. And on the beverage table where the water and juice are, there are a couple of copies, I don't know if there are any left, but of the paper in MS Word for your information. But just to read these out loud for you, these are typically informal networks of people, that's important, representing organizations and agencies, so it's private and public, who collaborate over time to implement a shared conservation vision across town and sometimes state boundaries. So first of all, I'd like to just talk a little bit about why I'm standing here before you, why is Heyward interested in RCPs, and I think I need to start with Heyward, because no one's heard of Heyward. That's the general thing when I say I'm from Heyward. Where is Heyward? Who's Heyward? Well, we're a conservation organization, a little bit more than 20 years old. We're backed by an operational foundation. Our history is in plant appreciation, landscape appreciation, as well as horticulture and forest ecology. And once our board learned about a vision for Massachusetts forest landscapes called Wildlands and Woodlands, it organized itself to support partners to implement that vision wherever people lived and worked, whether that was in Connecticut, Massachusetts, California, wherever. And when that vision was developed for all of New England, it grew more, again, to support this even bolder vision. And I'm not sure, I'd like to just maybe show of hands, how many people here have heard of Wildlands and Woodlands? Great. So raise your hands one more time. So can I call on, say, someone over here with their hands raised on specifics? How many people, what is the percentage of forests that we're hoping to conserve by 2060? 70%, that's right. So it's the idea is that the vision calls for 70% of New England to be in forest by 2060 and to be managed both as wildlands and woodlands. I would note that there's a group of organizations involved in helping to implement various strategies to help achieve the vision, and it's called the Wildlands Woodlands Initiative. Heyward and Harvard Forest are leads, but also New England Forestry Foundation's very much involved, as well as other academic institutions as well. One of the things that the Wildlands Woodlands author stated about the vision is that in order to realize that we would need to double the pace of conservation. And in New England, there are both opportunities and constraints to that. Some of the opportunities would be that there are hundreds of conservation land trusts already. So there's a lot of capacity, you might say, on the ground to help facilitate that increase in the pace. On the other hand, there's hundreds of thousands of landowners to reach out to and engage. There's hundreds of municipalities which to work with as well. So the Wildlands Woodlands authors stated in their report, and we agree, that in order to double the pace of conservation, we need a new grassroots movement. And we don't need more 501c3s and additional land trusts. We need new ways of coordinating activities across the landscape in order to achieve the vision, in order to have many landowners achieve their own conservation objectives. And that's really, this increase in coordination is the first step, and it's something that regional conservation partnerships like the network here often do very well. They share information, they share agendas of the various members of the partnership, and they begin to coordinate their activities across the landscape. The second step deals with increasing funding across all over the region, but also from many sources. And this is also something that many of us are working on. This is not, I think most people who are involved in conservation finance will tell you, obviously there's no silver bullet, it has to come from many different sources. But I believe, and I think I can point to many instances in which regional conservation partnerships help increase funding at the federal level through providing more attractive and exciting forest legacy projects that can attract more money to New England, and that's been happening. State funding in terms of RCPs that work with state agencies to help them be more strategic in their conservation investments, creating new programs that focus on leveraging more investment, more donations, and I'll speak about that as well. This idea that you're working with a long-term vision and a shared geography. Within that shared geography, there are municipalities. So how do you work with them to use the tools that they have, zoning and subdivision regulations, and their own budgets to conserve land within the context that you're promoting, within the pattern that your partnership is promoting? And then finally, with private funding, RCPs are very good at building the capacity of local and regional land trusts to reach out to donors, to build up their operational capacity, to do more, as well as to do better and more effective land conservation. I will note, I think I'm open, I have permission to speak about this. This graphic I shared with a major foundation this past Friday. They thought this is right on the money. They're very interested in supporting regional conservation partnerships, as seeing that as a very important way to spend a good chunk of money. So this is not something that just land conservation organizations are interested in. This isn't just something that Wildlands and Woodlands Initiative people are excited about. I'm certainly smitten with RCPs myself. I studied them as part of my master's thesis when I was in graduate school for planning, but they've been around for 20 years. This is a 20-year movement. And back in 1994, there were roughly 50 organizations involved in RCPs. And by 2010, there were 283 just within the 20 RCPs as part of the study that I mentioned earlier. Now there are well over 300 organizations working in partnership. And this isn't, the RCPs aren't just popular for local understaffed land trusts. Big NGOs find them to be useful vehicles for getting their work done. The Nature Conservancy state chapters in the 20 RCPs that we studied, again, that's in the research in the Journal of Forestry article, in those 20 case studies, 20 partnerships, the Nature Conservancy had participated in 13, the Trust for Public Land, 8. So another reason that I think RCPs are of growing interest to people is that they are, some can and have been shown to be very successful in conserving land as a partnership. So what I mean by that is that partners working together under a shared conservation vision are coordinating their activities and seeing the resultant increase in the pace or increasing activity and success such that they continue to function as a partnership and see it worth their while. All of these partnerships have conserved land as a partnership, some with amazing results relative to their regions. And you can go online to the RCP network, which I'll give you the link at the end, go on our interactive map and learn more about each of these partnerships. I do want to focus a little bit about the Quabbin to Cardigan partnership because I think it's maybe of particular interest to your region. So in terms of where it's located, Q2C is actually it's a two-state region from the Quabbin Reservoir in central Massachusetts north to the White Mountains. At 1.9 million acres, it's 65% as big as yours, if you will, but still relative to all the other partnerships outside of the Friends of the Conti, which is 7 million acres, I think it's a good comparison. The other thing that's important is it's hosted or led by the Society for the Protection of New Hampshire Forest. They provide the capacity, if you will, for the coordinator. They fund the coordinator position, which is held by Chris Wells, who's did a great job as coordinator. That's a statewide land trust. It's important to point out. Your region, your network also includes a number of statewide land trusts, potential host partners, maybe National Park Service. No pressure, just pointing out that possibility. So what I want to just point out in particular about the other reason I wanted to focus on Q2C is because of your science. I think of all the partnerships you have a very much in terms of the participation of science, academics, universities, and again, I felt like this is probably pretty appropriate. So Q2C went through a 3-year strategic conservation planning process. It was very much steeped in science as well as the consensus vision of the partners. That's just as part of the products. But the focus here was to identify focal areas. They identified a number of focal areas that represent 30% of the entire landscape. And within those focus areas, there was already about 39% of the land was already protected. Now, what SPNF did with Chris Wells in particular, and TNC was in fact a very strong partner in the Q2C and still is that they coordinated their activities to attract more forest legacy funding, more state funding, but the real, I think, progress happened when they established a due diligence fund with NRCS funding in 2009. And so that provided funding up to $50,000 per applicant to protect land within these focal areas. Now within 2002, between the period 2002 to 2012, the partners together protected about 90,000 acres, much of it within those focal areas. Which is interesting is after 2009, there was 2 rounds of funding through NRCS. And what happened next was the funding ran out because the earmarks went away. And a private donor stepped up, saw the need, and came up with some money for additional funding grant rounds. And that led to a grant round focused on trail maintenance and trail creation, as well as a new grant round for conservation that also included Massachusetts. So I'd now like to just focus on is the RCP network, just in terms of community of learning. This is a network that very much began with RCPs. When I was speaking with coordinators back in 2009 for the research, they said to me, well, it'd be great to meet other coordinators because back in 2008, 2009, partnerships, even within the same state, did not know about other partnerships. So we began convening them in 2008 as part of the Massachusetts-based Wildlands Woodlands Partnership. But we established our first RCP network gathering in 2010, very much like a Convergence. We had RCPs coming from all across New England. And since that time, we've grown in terms of services that we've sought to apply through the network, engaging partners in this community of learning. And these are just the 3 main areas I'm just going to go over very quickly. Under regional networking and associated services, again, we have this annual gathering. It's on November 13th in Nashua, Crown Point Plaza Hotel. You're all totally welcome to join us. And at the network gatherings, what we find is people voice their thoughts on what else they want, what else they need as a community of RCPs. This past year, we've had state regional conservation partnership meetings in Maine. It was hosted by Maine Coast Heritage Trust. In Vermont, we've had a meeting. Also, Connecticut and Rhode Island came together. We've also developed a service provider database of people, 19 individuals, consultants, GIS, law, attorneys, as well as organizational development people who really want to work with regional conservation partnerships. And we also provide webinars and trainings. We also have a LinkedIn group. I don't know if any of you are on LinkedIn, but it's a platform that's pretty useful, and a lot of people participate in just sharing information and updates. We began our research back in 2008, beginning to look at what are the other partnerships beyond the ones we knew in Massachusetts. We began this process. It basically took 5 years to write the paper, but it's roughly a 3-year study. What we learned in that was the key role the lead or host partner plays, and how quickly the partnership moves from emerging to maturing to conserving. So that's, excuse me, I missed my place. So one of the things that we learned through that process is that this concept of that partnerships have a path of development, emerging, maturing, conserving. We saw that through this research, but we tested it again in 2012 when we resurveyed RCP coordinators last year. We confirmed, we were looking at specifically at what are the specific challenges and needs for partnerships in each of these stages. What we learned are people pretty much down the line, everybody is interested in funding, obviously, but funding for what? So we were surprised that funding for organizational development, coordinator capacity, basically funding for the coordinator, and funding for outreach was common across all those stages of development. But certainly in maturing, RCPs were looking for funding for strategic conservation planning and mapping. Conserving RCPs were looking for due diligence funds to help with transactions. Also what's surprising is that we thought emerging partnerships were the only ones focused on or interested in knowledge about how to move from emerging to maturing, but that was also true for conserving partnerships who go through a large landscape scale initiative, they're done, and then now what? What's the next step? So the third area that we work in is in strategic capacity building, targeted technical and funding assistance, which much of it is capacity building. What this slide represents is the Northeast State Foresters Association multi-RCP, multi-state, 6-state landowner outreach and engagement initiative that the RCP network through HISTED is coordinating with state foresters in all these states. Basically, we're learning together what works best in engaging landowners, family forest owners, and conservation and stewardship activities. How to market, how to message, and then how to engage for outcomes. And this has resulted in the state foresters having a paradigm shift about working with NGOs and working with NGOs at the landscape scale, such that they now really, really want to work with RCPs. The phase 2 that we're putting in line right now, the application is due next week, is to include RCPs, these additional ones in the Connecticut Blueway, the Salmon Falls Watershed Collaborative, and then general work in southern Maine. Altogether, we have raised about $700,000 for RCPs through these grants. We're also working with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, a $100,000 pilot program that's $100,000 for 3 years. Each year to fund the due diligence costs for gifts of 50% or more of projects within the Massachusetts part of those priority landscapes. So again, following up landowner outreach to due diligence to conservation success. We mentor RCPs, certain RCPs. It could be a phone call, it could be a meeting, a steering committee meeting, or I serve on the steering committee of a couple of partnerships to help mentor those that have kind of weak lead partners, if you will. We have a training program, as well as is represented by this slide, which we've based on the research identified which groups want a capital campaign training. We did training this past spring where 4 RCPs learned the basic elements of a capital campaign, a collaborative capital campaign, and then we followed up with we're seeking funding for one-on-one mentorship to help them with a feasibility study and a case statement. We also work with a number of partners like OSI, the North Atlantic LCC, helping these organizations and agencies that are looking at how to take their science and make it useful to people working at these large landscapes. And I think that completes my talk, and I just wanted to suggest that if you're interested in learning more about regional conservation partnerships or accessing some of the resources, that you feel free to go to our website, the RCP network, which is on the wildlands and woodlands.org site, as well as join our LinkedIn network group, as well as please feel free to email me or give me a call if you want to follow up with any questions beyond this conference. Thank you.
Any questions for Bill?
I'm curious, this is Robin Alden from Penobscot East Resource Center. I'm curious if you were looking at the budget for these activities that you're talking about and the money that's being raised, what proportion goes to land acquisition and what proportion goes to stewardship activities?
Can you be specific about what activities you're talking about? Like, are you talking about the grant programs that we're talking about, or are you talking about RCPs in general, what they do?
Well, I guess my impression was that you were saying this network was creating a vehicle to leverage a lot of people's activities to increase the amount of conservation that was being done in New England.
Mm-hmm.
And so my question is that if you're looking at that gross number, how much of that is for land acquisition and how much of it is for ongoing stewardship activities?
Well, let me see if I think I understand what you're saying. So the money that RCPs are raising, or the monies that we are raising via, I'm sorry, I don't quite understand what context, what scale you're talking about. Individual regional conservation partnerships versus the network of RCPs?
I guess I was thinking you were talking about the network and you had your big graph of funding and you were looking at all.
Okay, got it. So the big graph of funding is really, since all conservation is local, and that landscape scale conservation is basically taking local conservation and making it regionally significant by coordinating that I would suggest that graph is really appropriate for individual regional conservation partnerships as well as all of New England. But I would say within the context of a privately funded capital campaign, that you would be raising money for both conservation and stewardship, but my guess is the majority of it would likely go towards land acquisition costs.
I want to preface this by saying this is a leading question because I know Bill, I work with him, but we were talking about this in the car coming up yesterday. Generally speaking, at a high level, what would it take for Darren to move from an emerging RCP to a maturing RCP to a RCP that was actually involved in conserving land in a joint way?
Well, I think, I'll make some assumptions. So assuming that you meet regularly and in person, say 4 times a year as a partnership, and you've done that for a number of years, so it's a very big region. I would say the first thing, if you don't have it yet, you'd want to have a strategic conservation vision and a plan for the entire 2-county region. It may seem like, well, it's too big, but I would say no, it's not too big. You might have a strategic conservation vision for the entire 2.9 million acres and identify focal areas in which partners already have alliances, already have areas of interest. You want to build upon your engines of activity already, which are, all of you working in the region. You want to find out where you're working now, what your priorities are, find out where there's greater potential for regional connectivity. I think that's certainly a strategic conservation plan would be a step. I don't know if you already have one. You already have one? Okay.
Not as a network, but several of the larger land trusts do have some, and we'll hear about that today.
The other thing you might think about doing, and this is, I co-coordinate a partnership in Fairfield County, Connecticut, which is less than 10 miles from Manhattan, and we're partnering with Westchester Land Trust on a project called Hudson to Housatonic Conservation Initiative. And we're in the process now of developing a strategic conservation vision, but also a plan. So it's one thing to put your map together and know where your focal areas, but then figuring out who's going to do what. This is kind of key, is for you as a network to figure out, well, how much of what you're going to do are individual partners doing their own thing with a larger context, that's one, doing their own thing but working in alliance with clusters of partners, and what to the extent you're having the organization itself doing things. That's very key to figure out, because you're going to find as you move forward with that, there's going to be rubs, organizational branding rubs, and that you'll figure that out. But that's why you need to meet regularly and in person. That was why on that research that we did, it was a predictor of success when groups did that. So a strategic action plan, I think how to implement your strategic conservation vision is key. Obviously, you might think about reaching out to engaging your stakeholders, and that's education and outreach and involvement and engagement. You need to figure out what kind of partnership you're going to be in terms of, are we going to have municipalities at the table with us, or are we going to serve municipalities? Are we going to have landowners at the table with us, or are we serving landowners? So those are kind of key questions to have. So it's a lot of kind of organizational development questions that you'll go through, but ultimately you want to think about early on in the process, where's the money? Successful partnerships thought of that early on as they are an emerging partnership. Who in your partnership, just like with an NGO and a board, who has access to funding? Who has access to the story that's going to result in the funding?
Thanks. Hi. I have a quick comment and a question. Some of the much smaller scale partnerships among conservation organizations in Down East Maine have benefited quite a lot by partnering with regional planning councils, which we call RPCs, which makes it very confusing. And so I wonder if in your neck of the woods, if you're having similar partnerships, because I know some of those sorts of organizations exist, and what kinds of roles do they play?
Right, so actually I'll speak very quickly. I was a planner. I have a career in forestry and planning before I became a regional conservationist. When I was a planner, I worked in Western Massachusetts doing regional planning and local planning, and I worked with the North Quabbin Regional Landscape Partnership. So I experienced helping towns understand the role they can play within the larger landscape greenway vision. So all that comes from kind of partial experience. But so that's as a regional planning agency sending someone who's just a participant, but a very active participant, a leader, if you will. There is a land trust, there's an RCP in the mouth of the Connecticut River watershed, which is called the Lower Connecticut River Coastal Region Land Trust Exchange. That is hosted by the now River COG, the River Council of Governments, which has actually merged two RPA, well, they call them regional planning agencies, together to form one. And so they're the host partner. That's pretty much it in terms of the whole community of RPAs or RCPs that have a regional planning agency as the host or lead partner. It's a unique thing. What is their role in what way? In the lower land trust exchange? Yeah. Well, I would say they help to administer the Gateway Commission, which is a municipal compact along the Connecticut River. So they have this foundation of obviously thinking landscape scales at a regional planning agency, but they host, if you will, they pay the coordinator of the land trust exchange, which is a key relationship of the host or lead partner to the partnership. And that provides the partnership with some sustainability and some kind of even keel as funding goes up and down, other funding goes up and down.
Okay, thanks, Bill.
Thank you.
Okay, everyone, we're going to take a break from 10 to 10:20, And please come back on time. I want to remind everyone that we have posters in the room across the hall. Please take this time to view them, and we'll return here at 10:20 for our panel discussion. Thanks.